All right, so let's talk about what a function is. A function is simply if I input x into, we'll say, this function f, then it will output y. Okay, if I input any kind of variable, this is going to be an independent variable, any number, any real number. Like if I input any real number into this function that we're calling f, then when we solve it, it will give us an output or an answer. You could even say that. So writing this out, I could just as well say the function of x is equal to y. This is all kind of the same thing. I'm just saying if I input a variable x into this function f, then it's going to output an answer, y. Okay? Now, y is not over here, but I'm just trying to explain to you what a function is and what we're doing while we're even saying, saying f of x, what this whole thing means and what a function does in mathematics. So if we go over here and we see our function f of x, okay, and it equals these three different functions, okay? It equals 1/4 x minus 1 if and only if our variable x is less than or equal to -1. Okay, so basically just meaning if we had, let's say we have a number table or a number line. We'll say zeros here, -1, -2, and we have +1, we have +2, +3, okay? You see this number line right here. All right? And so it's basically saying if x is less than or equal to -1, meaning if it's -1 or smaller, any number that way, then we're going to use this function right here. We're going to plug our x, our variable x, into this x right here. We're going to use this to solve and figure out what our output is. However, if x is is greater than -1 or less than 2, just meaning if x is between these two numbers, so that's this section here, it's got to be greater than -1, but it's got to be less than 2, all these numbers right here, then we're going to use this function right here. We're going to use this right here. Okay? We're going to plug our variable x into this spot right here, and then we're going to work it out. We're going to solve it, and we're going to get the output. And then the last one is saying, but if x is greater than or equal to 2, if it's 2 or more, any number above 2 or equal to 2, then our f of x, our function, is going to be -2. So there's not even an x to even plug in here. It's just saying that -2 is going to be practically the output. It's just, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second. So the question says find f of 1. So 1 is the variable that we're looking at. We're saying if x equals 1, we're saying, so f of 1 is saying if x equals 1, then you could say, I don't want to use y because we haven't used y. Then we could say, what is the function, okay? F of x. All right? If x equals 1, then what's the answer to the function? Or what's the output of the function? I could even say that. If x equals 1, then what is the output of f of x, okay? And so, what we're going to do here is if x equals 1, so which function we're going to use? X equals 1, so this function right here is only applied if x is less than or equal to -1, so it doesn't apply for this one. X equals 1, it's going to be this function right here. If it's going to be the second function, because 1 up here tells us to use this function right here. So we could say this function f of x, I'm going to use that one. It's the opposite of x minus 1 squared plus 1. Okay, that's the function we're using. Again, because it told us to use f of 1. So when x equals 1, we're going to use that function because that's what this tells us. So now we're going to plug in our 1. So now we're going to say, well, if that's our function, then f of 1 just means we're going to plug that, where we saw that x, we're going to plug a 1 into it. So the opposite of 1 minus 1 squared plus 1. So f of 1 equals, obviously 1 minus 1 is 0. So you could say the opposite of 0 squared plus 1. Well, obviously that just means that the answer is 1 because 0 squared is 0. The opposite of 0 is 0. So that just all that cancels out and we're left with 1. So f of 1 is 1. Now it says find f of 2. F of 2. So if x equals 2, then what output does the function give? So let's look at this. If x equals 2, then we're actually down to the third function because it's got x is greater than or equal to 2. So therefore, we're going to use the function f of x equals -2. Well, that's the answer because there is no x in this scenario. So if we did f of 2, it's still just going to be -2 because there's nowhere for me to plug an x in to this equation. So this one just ends up being f of x equals -2. And the thing is, the next one says f of 3. Well, again, we're going to be using that same function because when x is greater than or equal to 2, which 3 is greater than 2, then it says to use that function. So f of 3, again, is just going to equal -2. Okay? That's how those go. But that's what you do. You take whatever number they're going to give you, whatever variable they're going to tell you to do, and you plug it into the function that is appropriate based on the ranges that it's telling you. If they would have told us to do f of -3, okay? If they'd have told us to do that, then we would have came up here and we'd have picked the first function because -3 is less than -1, and so then we would have came down here and we would have said it's 1/4 x minus 1. So we would have came down here and we just said 1/4 times -3 because that's where the x is. We're just plugging in. We're plugging in our -3 where the x is, and then it would be -1, and then we carry that out, which just this. This is just going to end up being -3/4 because basically that's the same thing as saying 1/4 times -3 over 1, and then you just do 3 times 1 and then 1 times 4, and that's going to equal negative 3 over 4. So negative 3/4 minus 1. So then f of negative 3, that equals negative 7/4, because we could take that 1 and just as easily make it a 4 over 4, so that we could add this together. And so two negatives just add up to more negatives, and so 4 over 4 plus, or yeah, negative 4 over 4 minus 3 over 4 is negative 7. Negative 7 over 4. Anyways, so I just wanted to give you an example if it would have given us a variable to use to do a different function, and that's how you're going to work it out with all of your functions with these problems. If you have any questions, though, just send me a message back.